Oh yeah, sexy biscuits. Nice.
Long boy clothes, 1975. A used world's on the rise. Reviewing games late at night and sometimes friends used to bug me. Long boys clothes, 1975.
Hey YouTube, Lawnboys Post 1975, and welcome to a very special video combining three of my favourite things. Nostalgia, the ZX Spectrum, and the arcades. Now, obviously, nostalgia aside, the other two are a massive, massive part of my childhood. You've only got to watch my channel, for any period of time to hear me constantly, my last video, hear me constantly mention, the Spectrum and the arcades. So I wanted to do my favourite top 10 games, arcade conversions that is, on the ZX Spectrum. Now obviously I've done my favourite top 10 Spectrum games possibly a couple of years ago, and a few of these will feature in that list, but that's a testament to not only what amazing conversions they are, but even if you take the arcade side away of it, what amazing games they are. Now obviously taste is subjective, so you might be looking at it and going, really, that's there and that's above it, or why is that one that high or that one that low? But that's how it works. These are ones that I loved in my childhood and got to play in the arcades, and also got to play on the Spectrum, which is where, I can truly appreciate how good, or not how good in some cases, not this list obviously, the conversion was. Now, the thing about the ZX Spectrum, 48K eventually won to 8K, this is a mixed bag of both types of games. The thing about the ZX Spectrum is, in the right hands, it's funny, because if you didn't grow up with it, I don't know, there's two camps in this country. There's the people who grew up with it and understand, not just because we're fanboys, but what an incredible machine it was, and what, revolution machine it was, and what it did for gaming, or computers in general, in this country. And then there's people who had no experience of it whatsoever, and so probably look at the rest of us prattling on about it and don't understand, how good it was, or maybe turn their nose up at it. I don't know, but there's no denying in the right hands it could really punch above its weight, and it could produce some absolutely phenomenal games and phenomenal arcade conversions. So, number 10 is Outrun. This is funny, right? We went from the previous, listen to music again, previous stage of having bollocks all traffic to now it's rush hour in Spectrum form. I can't avoid it! Oh! Hey, so you don't flip then, or sorry, you don't spin unless you ram it full on. So why is Outrun even in this list? Because yes, it's slow, it's a bit creaky, but as I said in my recent gameplay, it is the arcade to me. It looks, granted, probably better stationary, but it looks like the arcade of all 8-bit versions, and that goes for the Sega Master System. I would say, possibly not the PC Engine, I would say that it has the Ferrari looks the most like the arcade. And yeah, it's a bit slow, it's a bit creaky, but it still plays solidly, and it still, to me, is Outrun in the home, on the Spectrum, which Outrun in the home was something, if you're of my generation, was a really, really big deal and important thing. So, number 9 would be Enduro Racer. That little bit parallax with the sky in the background behind all the rocks. Nice, 10 seconds, this is not going well. Now I'm assuming that's sand coming from my back wheel, or I'm Billy Fartpants. Who plants a fucking tree on a race course? Who throws a shoe? Come on. Now, when I say there's going to be certain types of games that are kind of repeated, or certain genres that are repeated, well, that's it. That's going to be the racing genre. But maybe that's because it was, I don't know why, it was one that could, the Spectrum could handle a lot better than other ones. Or maybe it was just because they were all good games that tickled my fancy. Loved Enduro Racer in the arcade. Got to play the amazing cabinet where you pulled the front down like that. And, again, it was a big deal that this came to the Spectrum. And this was the first of all these types of driving games, that had this graphical style, because it's quite similar to Outrun, that bought, that Sega sprite scaling home. And I believe that the Spectrum version is probably the best, again, taste is subjective, but to me, the best 8-bit version. But yeah, plays well, plays really fast, tight controls, just, again, that amazing feat of porting a machine that you never believed would be this good at home, and giving you that, that, again, a machine that you loved, the chance to play in your home on your Spectrum. Now, number 8 would be Bubble Bobble. Right, so jump, There we go. Ah, and it's got the, you know, the traditional, you know, bubble wobble music. Oh, you could jump off your bubbles, I forget that. Can I just say, the jumping noise is identical to the 48K Spectrum. Another example of a game I adored in the arcades, and a brilliant example of simplicity being key and being best. Jumping around, 1 or 2 players, Bub and Bob, all struggle to say bobble bobble. Say it 10 times in a row and Candyman shows up. But yeah, you know, simplicity is key, not necessarily, you know, driven by its graphics, but its amazingly tight controls. And the fact just travelling around the screen, trapping animals or creatures in bubbles, bursting them, collecting the fruit, clearing the screen, progressing. Rinse and repeat. Absolutely amazing. And, you know, you would say, well, it's simple. You know, it's not graphically a powerhouse or anything like that. You know, so surely it's incredibly easy to be ported to the Spectrum. Not so. You know, there's many examples of, you know, this sort of genre of game that just didn't work on the Spectrum. But this was done absolutely fantastically. You got rave reviews back in the day. And once again, this is key, you're going to hear a lot in this list, was the fact that a machine I absolutely loved and adored got ported to the Spectrum and ported amazingly. And even though it's kind of monochromic-ish, it looks like the arcade. It really, really does. And that's not just, you know, my head filling in the gaps. Anyway, number 7 would be Super Hang-On. And also, as I said, it brings in, you know, right, is there attribute clash? I don't think there is. It brings in some colour elements into the background and looks actually, you know, pretty good. Oh, shit! I don't know how I got back on the road. Yeah, it scales reasonably good. As I said, if you've never grew up the Spectrum, then you're probably looking at this and think, oh, bollocks, and apparently Wendy I can fly, but you don't get to see me fly, just the bike. Again, it's a testament to how well the Spectrum can do these types of games, racing games, and maybe also the reason that there's so many of them in this list, not just because they're amazing, amazing games, but was because of my love of the Sega sprite scaling arcade machines. Because let's be honest, you know, of my age, my generation, those machines made your jaw hit the floor, you know, back in the day, and those memories stayed with me, and once again, got to play it at home. That's why it was so great, because it was an absolutely fantastic port. I mean, you could turn it on or off, but they even gave you colour on your bike, you know, and it's super smooth, super fast. I would argue much faster and smoother than Enduro Racer, you know, and that was no slouch. And again, you know, motorbikes, Sega, perfect port, fantastic. Sank so much of my life into this in the arcades and at home on the Spectrum. Just once again, and it's funny because it uses the same graphical style as Enduro Racer, which was Activision, and Outrun, which was US Gold. But they're all different software houses. So obviously someone worked out that this style was key to getting that level of arcade, you know, powerhouse and sprite scaling onto a humble machine with 48K. Now, excuse me, my list is down there. And again, this is Sega. So number 6 is Thunderblade. Right, so pulling back on the joystick and pushing down is how I move around. So, right, you can see, ooh, bollocks, that there is a stacking sprite effect, right? But here's how it works. Holding fire down is how you accelerate or move forward, which means you're kind of multitasking the controls. It takes a lot of getting used to, but come on, that's pretty impressive. Oh, bollocks. Come on, Thunderblade, what's not to love? It was the 80s. You had Blue Thunder, you had Airwolf, you know, Top Gun. Everyone loved shit in the sky. And Thunderblade was a fantastic arcade machine by Sega. And of all the ones on this list, you could argue this was the one you would thought would never get a port to the Spectrum as good as it was. Because obviously in the arcade, there were two sort of types of gameplay. There was the up and down, stack sprites that give you effective 3D, where you could go into the ground and back up from the ground. 3D, amazing. And then into the screen like Afterburner, obviously not as fast. Just into the screen would be difficult in the wrong hands, but the up and down with stacked sprites, amazing. Not even the Mega Drive or the Master System attempted what they did on the Spectrum. Even the PC Engine, which has stacked sprites, still doesn't have that up and down momentum, but Thunderblade on the Spectrum by US Gold was phenomenal. It actually stacked sprites. It actually gave you the ability to go up and down into the screen like the arcade. That was mind-blowing. And also, it looked, well, to me, I mean, I'm a Spectrum boy, it looked utterly fantastic. And not just that, but into the screen was super smooth, super tight. I mean, brilliant controls, brilliant graphics. A lot of love went into this game. It swept all, the rave reviews, and rightly so. And to this day shows up 16-bit machines, as in, hi, big guys down here, ZX Spectrum, 48K, stacked sprites. get on that. So yeah, Thunderblade, I mean, come on, that's just, if you've got an inch of fucking love for, you know, machines punching above their weight, this is a perfect example of what the Spectrum can do in the right hands. Now, number 5, Rainbow Islands.
Oh, bloody hell, that was close. There we go. It does get a little bit of, you know, getting used to, kind of, as long as you progress forward, the rainbows are cool. Oh shit. But if you kind of stammer, then they bite you in the ass. There's no pot of gold at the end of these bad boys. Cliche! Right. Now, I think this is another great example of stuff on the Spectrum that's absolutely amazing. It's such a great port.
Now, Rainbow Islands, obviously the follow-up to Bubble Bobble, although you're human, never understood how that happened. Never explained, really. Platformer, same idea in the sense that it's a simplistic mechanic to progress to the end of the level, but it's not confined to one screen. And instead of bubbles, you have rainbows to get to the top of the screen before it floods, killing the monsters, collecting the fruit, fighting bosses. Simple, very nice graphics, but simple graphics compared to many of the arcade machines at the time, many of the ones listed in this list. But where it was absolutely fantastic on the Spectrum was, look at the colour. The Spectrum is not known for amazingly colourful games, or when it was more a case of attribute clash would kind of make it look a bit yucky. But, you know, more often than not, again, with most of the games in this list, people went with a monochromic look, which I have no problem with, but this was just balls to the wall. Ocean just went, no, screw it. We're gonna do Rainbow Islands, and we're gonna do it in colour. And not only just in colour, but looked fantastic, and Key played so amazingly good. I mean, yeah, this is an example of the Spectrum punching way above its weight. Now, number 4, Renegade.
Right, well, we know what to do now, don't we? One man and his dog, isn't it? Oh, I was just about to kick him in the balls. Oh, here you go. How'd you like them up? Oh my god, look what he did to my health. My hooch screwed. Right, come on, someone. There we go.
The Renegade, obviously, you know, the precursor to Double Dragon, an absolutely fantastic beat 'em up. Way back in the day, before beat 'em ups, you could argue, were this kind of scrolling backwards and forwards, punching people, kicking people, clearing the stage of enemies, fighting bosses, and progressing. And again, you know, I don't think it was that popular over here in the arcades. I never ever actually got to play an arcade version of it until I was an adult. But even then, like, memories came flooding back, and once I played it in the arcades and then played it on MAME, it absolutely blew me away. You know, I just thinking and reminiscing about, holy cow, the Spectrum version was a really good port. Simplified graphics compared to the arcade, but very nice looking graphics, very defined graphics. You've only got to look at the Commodore 64 version to see or appreciate, realise how good the Spectrum graphics are in this game. And the controls, absolutely amazing. Hard for me, but again, truly perfect representation of the arcade. I mean, it blows my mind that, you know, just putting this list together, I mean, it's 35, years since the Spectrum, and I'm still, when I put this together, still blown away and can truly appreciate games like this and how close they are to the arcade and what amazing work someone did with just 48K of memory. I mean, it's mind-blowing. Now, number 3, Bomb Jack.
The mechanic is simple. You have a jump. You can't out and out fly. Ooh. But if you tap it, you can sort of hover. Come on. The other interesting thing is, if you get like, oh, that's a power pill. There we go. I kind of use them in the same way I do in Pac-Man, which is, I don't really care about eating the bad guys.
Once again, the ability to play a game that I sank so much of my life and money into in the arcades was what made this home port so utterly special. Bomb Jack, superhero. Can he fly? Can he glide? Flying around the screen, collecting bombs, collect them in the order that they will blow up to get the highest score, avoiding the enemies, collecting power pills, rinse and repeat. Again, simplicity is key. Now, the Spectrum version, oh my god. I mean, bearing in mind that this is probably 1984, Elite Systems, they were a great software house for arcade conversions, despite the fact that this is the only one of their games that made it into the list. But the Spectrum version was not just like the arcade in spirit was the arcade. It is such a good, close port. The gameplay mechanics are identical, as in, when I say that, the playability of it is just right. You know, the tightness of the controls, the speed of reaction, the sense of dread when you get penned in by the enemies and stuff like that. Dying when you've just got one bomb left to collect. It's just fantastic, and all the stages look brilliant. And again, you've only got to look at the Commodore 64 version, and this is not me bashing, but you've only got to look at the Commodore 64 version. While it has the colour, has all the colour of the arcade, it plays like a turd. I'm sorry, the Spectrum version is just a phenomenal arcade port. Now, we're getting into the last two. The penultimate one, this is really difficult to put it, pry it apart from the first one, but I'm pretty sure most people who know me in the Spectrum will know what these are. But, number 2, Chase HQ.
There we go. See, how did he get through all of that? I didn't know Lamborghinis were known for their stealth. Oh shit, another turbo. Tunnel effect's really, really nice, I find. Oh shit, right, come on. I'd imagine, this is far easier with a joystick.
Chase HQ. I mean, it's the 80s. What to say about this arcade machine? I mean, it's the era of fast cars, cool cops. I mean, this game is basically Knight Rider crossed with Miami Vice. You know, tear down the freeway, use your turbo to catch up to a bad guy. When you catch up to him, ram the shit out of him. No other arcade games did this at the time. They were like, sure, we've got driving, we got all that covered. But this one was like, yeah, well, you can bat the crap out of the person. Arcade, I mean, was it an Outrun beta graphically? It was a beautiful, beautiful game, and it played really, 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 really well. And I know there are people who can go through it on 10p. I found it balls hard, and constantly put my money into it. Again, that's why this was a blessing at home. But could never, ever get past level 2. I sucked, but I was still compelled by the gameplay. So when I saw that Ocean were porting this, because Ocean had a solid track record at this point. I mean, I was over the moon, and also I knew that there was a very good chance we would get a bloody amazing port. I don't think anyone, was ready for what we got. Possibly one of the best graphically looking games on the Spectrum. Easily one of the best technical arcade conversions on the Spectrum. It features everything from the arcade and sacrifices nothing, albeit you could say colour. But that's the ZX Spectrum. But yeah, the gameplay, the speed is phenomenal. The ramming of the cars. Just this was something else. This is the best driving game on the Spectrum. Hence the fact that it's number 2 in the arcade list, but easily number 1 in the best driving game on the Spectrum. And Ocean, you deserve a pat on the back still for this conversion. I mean, you've only got to look at the Amiga, the Atari ST, and the Commodore. They were pups. Sorry, they were pups. The Amstrad version was basically a colour version of the Spectrum, so, that's a solid port as well, but this is a Spectrum list. And Chase HQ, one of my favourite arcade machines. Hey, you don't have to be good at an arcade machine for it to still be one of your, favourite arcade machines. Hence the fact that this was such a big deal when it came out on the Spectrum. And to this day, I still play it and absolutely love it and revel in what an amazing conversion it is. Now, number 1... pretty sure most of you would have guessed this. R-Type.
Nice. I can't recall, here he comes, if you can do the trick where you shoot your orb into his stomach. That just sounded really, really wrong, didn't it? Got your eye. Let's see. Let's find out. Oh, you can. No, I didn't pull you back. Why are you coming back?
Now here is a game that simply, on paper, should not exist on the ZX Spectrum. I mean, R-Type in the arcades, it's up there with Gradius for setting the, hey, no one said I was easy, get ready to have your ass kicked. Again, another reason, because I played it in a safari park of all places and loved it. Could never, ever, ever get past the heart on level 2. But, I mean, it was a beautiful looking game, and there were great ports of it. The PC Engine was amazing. I had the Master System back in the day, but they're powerful machines. This should not be possible on a ZX Spectrum, and this is the best 8-bit version across the computers in the UK. It pissed all over the Commodore 64, and it pissed all over the then Amstrad version. I'm not talking about the new Amstrad one, I'm talking about the then Amstrad one. This thing was this wasn't just punching above its weight. People looked at this game. People looked at this game on the Spectrum and just went, holy shit, is that R-Type on the Spectrum? Yes, my friends, yes it is. It was one of those moments when you were proud to wave the flag and be in the corner with the ZX Spectrum. I mean, massive sprites. Absolutely massive sprites. Loads of colour. Loads of colour. You know, that thing, colour, normally the enemy of the ZX Spectrum. No colour clash. Loads of bullets on the screen. Loads of sprites on the screen. Massive bosses. The weapons. Perfect replications, or representations, I should say, of the weapons from the arcades. And they were colour as well. You've only got to look at the ring laser for the blue and purple. Fantastic. And the first level boss. As good as the arcade. This is a game, and rightly so is it number one, because I could play this back in the day and not be bankrupt anymore, still get my ass kicked, but this is a game that basically says, in the right hands, the Spectrum is a fucking powerhouse. 48k, look at it. Granted, you had to load the levels in, but hey, it was the 80s. We could live with that. We love tape decks after all, but R-Type is a phenomenal achievement and an amazing, amazing looking game, an amazing playing game. And it is my favourite arcade conversion on the ZX Spectrum. And now this was a really difficult list to put together. I mean, there are honourable mentions, Space Harrier, New Zealand Story, you know, but when I had to sit down and put pen to paper and just thought about the ones that I loved the most and the arcade games I loved the most, and they just delivered it. Just basically said, here you go, here's the arcade at home. Because that's what you wanted back then, that's what you wanted. And that's why this list is this list. Now, as always, I'd love to know what you think. What are your favourite arcade conversions on the ZX Spectrum? Hell, what are your favourite arcade conversions on the Amstrad or the Commodore? And as always, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you later.